And welcome back to Day 3 of CPAC 2024. My name is Grace Saldana, and I'm joined by Paul Ingrassia, who is arguably President Trump's favorite Substack writer right now. Paul, thank you for coming.
Thank you so much for having me on. One of my favorite networks, RSBN, and it's been a great CPAC so far. And the crowd is beginning to really file in to see our 47th president of the United States. It's also obviously the South Carolina primary today. So hopefully, it's going to be a double victory for President Trump. I expect to see an amazing speech today and also a victory in South Carolina.
Absolutely. He's, crushing Nikki Haley in the polls.
Yes.
There's no possible way that she comes out anywhere even close to him tonight.
Not at all. I mean, listen, she's relying completely on Democratic voters, on independents who lean left, and there aren't too many of those types in South Carolina, which is a deep red state. So, she doesn't have a real voter base, as we all know. She's being funded by Reid Hoffman and all these liberal, far-left, woke billionaires who are also financing the witch hunt, the political weaponization against him, as we see in like the E. Jean Carroll case in New York State, where I'm from, and so many of these other cases. So she is the very definition of sort of paid opposition, and hopefully she'll go down in flames. Bird brain hopefully will be butchered today, and hopefully we'll knock her out of the race. That's what we expect, but at the bare minimum, President Trump will have a resounding victory today in South Carolina, and that's what everyone here seems to believe.
Right, and it's insane how the Democrats and the Biden DOJ are weaponizing our systems against President Trump. You're an attorney in New York. You're familiar with all these cases, I'm sure. So what do you think the future is of these cases? Do you think that, just tell us your thoughts.
I mean, it's very sad. It's a sad reflection on our justice system, the state of affairs in our country at large. I mean, you're having basically one half of the country, or the ruling class, the current regime, the Biden regime, literally persecuting a political opponent. Now, these are the people who claim to be the biggest supporters of our democracy and the biggest defenders of our democracy, using anti-democratic means, namely the justice system, to silence President Trump, to persecute him. They hope to bring him in jail, put him in jail, and take him out of the presidential race. Of course, that won't happen. I see these cases ultimately imploding. Obviously, the disaster that was Fani Willis in Georgia, that whole thing basically fell apart, given all the corruption and all the scandals that came to light over the past couple of weeks. The same thing hopefully will happen with this D.C. case involving Jack Smith, and New York State is one of the worst, one of the most corrupt justice systems in the country. So the only way this will go through is if, great American patriots, and they're, the silent majority, they're no longer the silent majority, if they continue to fight, they continue to push back against this, the regular people, the narrative will collapse. But we have to keep the pressure on the people who are behind this witch hunt and the weaponization of our justice system.
I'm glad to hear you say that, and I want to go a little bit deeper into that. This is clearly election interference.
Yep.
All these hearings are, they're timed right around, Super Tuesday's coming up. President Trump's going to be distracted and having to go to New York and go to Georgia and this place and that place. But that's not going to stop the American people from supporting him or voting for him.
It won't. It won't support them. And I think the base, if you go by 2020, which of course was rigged, and there are a lot of fraud and there's a lot of irregularities, of course, in that race. But, assuming the 75 million that he had back then plus, I think that he adds to that already. I think his base of supporters has grown, upwards of 100 million. And you're seeing this based on how well he's doing in all these primaries, so far. And so the momentum has to continue on that front. But I think, as you said, the process is the crime. The process is the obstruction, the election interference. The fact that he has to appear in court rather than being on the campaign trail, rather than preparing to make speeches, rather than planning his next administration, that itself is obstruction, that itself is election interference. So even if he gets off the hook ultimately, even when he does, not if, when, because he's going to prevail, they're still impeding, his ability to, obviously put the strongest foot forward, so to speak, in terms of, planning for the next administration, which is we need our Republicans, in Congress to really step up and denounce this. This is on them. This has to be a group effort. It can't be totally on Donald Trump's back. All of us have a part to play, and especially our elected officials.
Absolutely, and I think that Congress is trending that way for sure.
Yeah.
You know, people like Congressman Matt Gaetz, Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene have really led the way on that, and I think we saw that even with the recent speaker election.
Exactly, and we're talking about this. Obviously, you had Congressman Gaetz here on this network doing a great interview. But you know, we're talking about like it's, you know, you can't become complacent. It's easy for D.C., a city like Washington D.C., to, and this is what they want to do: revert back to the status quo prior to Donald Trump, revert back to the same policies that have led to the destruction of our southern border, that have led to the deindustrialization of our economy, that have led to the offshoring of jobs, that have empowered countries like the CCP and other countries that are, you know, obviously now, you know, seeing us represented on the world stage with a senile, crippled old man and Joe Biden, and basically laughing at us, you know, Iran and all these other countries, North Korea being one of them. So, you know, there's a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of work to be done. And that's the reason why people like Matt Gaetz, who have stepped up, who have exercised the motion to vacate, who have continued to throw sort of wrenches into the system, that's a good thing, because it keeps, you know, it prevents the system from reverting back to its former complacent, you know, ways that have destroyed our country, basically.
Right. Got a tough question for you.
Sure.
So.
That's why I'm here.
Semi-tough. How do we win? You know, President Trump keeps saying, you know, we have to overwhelm the polls. A lot of people are very concerned about election integrity after 2020 and what we saw, and they're saying, well, the rules haven't changed since then, so why should we think we have a chance? What do you think? Well,
listen, there's a legitimate concern. I think the momentum is on his side. I think, assuming even a somewhat, and I don't want to take anything for granted, but even factoring some degree of fraud, I think he still will do well. Obviously, the election, however, comes down to 3 or 4 states in 2020 decided by 40 or 50,000 voters between 3 or 4 states, and we know those states: Pennsylvania, Arizona, Georgia, the key swing states. Obviously, he's polling better than he's ever polled in his entire political career, 2016 and 2020 included, in all of these states, and he's added to that with states like Nevada, where he has 10-point margins by some polls. So the polling, the political ground game is really good. It looks really good for him. We just have to, obviously, again, hold our elected officials accountable. I'm from New York State. The Republican Party in New York State is still anti-Trump. They're full of rhinos. And, you know, we're leading grassroots efforts in states like New York and New Jersey to put the pressure on these people. They have to endorse Donald Trump. If your congressman is a Republican and still hasn't endorsed Donald Trump, call them up, you know, as a regular voter, call them up as a constituent. You have a duty to do so. They have a duty to rally behind him at the bare minimum. You know, I think what's also promising is this recent news that the RNC, and hopefully this will happen over the next week or so, is being overhauled. Hopefully Ronna McDaniel steps down and it's replaced by President Trump's recommendations.
That would be a huge move.
Lara Trump, Chris LaSavita, and so on and so forth. That would be a huge, huge move for the Republican Party at large.
Absolutely. That just kind of adds to the point we were talking about earlier.
Right.
It's just this shaping up to be more and more America first every day.
It is. It is. It's the party of Trump. And the reason is not just because, you know, it's not a cult. It's not like loyalty to one man. It's because he's the thing in the way. You know, he always says that he is the one obstacle in the way between the ruling class in this country going after you and me, the regular American people.
They're not after me. They're after you.
Exactly.
I'm just standing in the way.
Exactly it. That's exactly right. And that's why we need leadership to reflect that reality on the ground.
Love that. Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about, I'm sure maybe you're privy to some of this. President Trump has been teasing some rallies in New York, in the Bronx, in Madison Square Garden. He said a couple other places they're considering. Do you have any insight on that?
Well, a recent poll had him, this was in October, and I'm sure it's narrowed since then, like within 9 points of Joe Biden in a state like New York. And I think it's even closer in a state like New Jersey, which should be very competitive. You know, back in 2022, Lee Zeldin, who ran for governor, only lost by 6 points in New York State to Kathy Hochul. In 2021, Jack Ciattarelli, the Republican, lost by 3 points to the Democrat, Phil Murphy. So these states can be competitive. It came very, very close. Donald Trump, obviously New York is his home. This is where he built his businesses. A lot of negative news coming out of New York over the past, several years because of these political witch hunts. But I think a rally would be really, really good. It would be a really welcome homecoming because the Republican voters, even not just Republicans in New York State, independents and many Democrats as well, given the fact that there are many Trump supporters in the Bronx, and that's not traditional Republican country by any means, they all love Donald Trump. No one in New York, if you ask the average man on the street, is a Biden supporter. So I think it's an excellent idea, and I think it's something that, as Trump would say, he's looking at very strongly.
Absolutely. Do you think New York will ever become a red state?
I think it can, and there's a lot of work to be done. And the main obstacle, again, is the Republican establishment, this trenchant Republican establishment, and the people in charge, Ed Cox, I'll name them, Joe Cairo, the people in charge of the state who have held out, and they put in candidates. We saw in the New York 3rd Congressional District race, the recent race, which was a major debacle for George Santos's former district. They put in a candidate there who was anti-Trump, who's still a registered Democrat. So you have to put in America First Republican nationalists who support Donald Trump into the races. It's a very simple formula, but these people apparently have not learned the lesson over the past 8 or 9 years. If they had learned that lesson, and the Republican establishment in New York and in New Jersey got a little bit more on board, they're a little bit better in New Jersey. I think these states could be very competitive, and competitive as soon as this November.
Right, and I think that a couple of leaders doing an excellent job in New York are people like Congresswoman Elise Stefanik and Lee Zeldin. Who are some other people that are on our side?
In New York,
New York,
myself,
New Jersey,
the New York Young Republican Club, Gavin Wax, give him a shout out, Andrew Giuliani, those types, Vish Burrow, who is here, I see him all over the place. In New Jersey, the America First Republicans of New Jersey, a great organization. You have Jeff Van Drew, who is President Trump's campaign state director for the state of New Jersey. He's doing excellent work there as well. So those types of groups, Mike Crispy, who leads that America First Republican group, they're actually doing real great headway. They're registering voters. They're getting signatures to get Trump on the ballot. Those types of efforts go a long, long way. Really putting yourself out there in the field, talking to regular people, really goes a long way. And you're seeing efforts like that in both states, especially New Jersey.
Incredible. What is your final message to our viewers?
Well, the viewers have to be optimistic. There's obviously these next 9 or 10 months between now and Election Day are extremely pivotal for this country. This is a make or break election for the United States of America, and that's no exaggeration. This is the most important election in our lifetime. It's a generational movement for our country. And listen, all the momentum is on President Trump's side. Just keep the hope, get involved, stay on the grassroots, register voters. We need to register voters in any state. It doesn't matter if you're a deep red state, a purple state, or even a deep blue state. There are many unregistered Republican would-be Trump voters who need to get on the ballot, or who need to be registered, and that will help go a long way because, again, the election will be determined potentially. I think it will be more than just 40 or 50,000 votes. I think President Trump, if all goes fairly well, will win with a considerable margin in 2024, more so than 2016 even. So, I think it's good. We just got to keep the momentum going and the positive energy going.
And lastly, before we go, how can people keep up with you on social media?
So I'm all over the place. I'm on X. My handle is just Paul Ingrassia. Also my Substack, which is regularly retruths. I write articles
all the time
covering the campaign by President Trump himself. That's paulingrassia.substack.com, paulingrassia.substack.com.
Okay, well, thank you very much for coming on, Paul.
Thank you so much, Grace. It's a pleasure.